Hello, my name is Bryn Thomas and I'm a partner in the agricultural team at HCR based in the Cardiff office. We have here with us today Ben Thompson. He is the Agritech manager at Hartpury University and Hartpury College. Hi Ben, thank you for being with us.
Hi Bryn, yeah, good to be here.
The topic of the session is Agritech, which is what we're going to talk about with Ben today. Why talk about it? Well, it's a hot topic on the agricultural agenda at the moment, and it's gathering momentum all the time. Only yesterday, for instance, I was looking at going through my social media on LinkedIn, and there was a post, albeit in the US, Sacramento, and that showed an advanced farm robotic apple harvester in full flow, which seemed to be capable of picking about 30 apples a minute. So that's just one of the few things which are being developed at the moment. Agritech impacts all areas of the agricultural industry, from livestock to arable, and it's trending in many areas. The Internet of Things, robotics, AI, drones, precision agriculture, biotechnology, big data and analytics, and controlled environment agriculture, i.e. vertical farming and the like. Technological advancements in the agri sector meet the growing demand for farm automation, digitalization and sustainability, and emerging agricultural trends really do mark a shift towards smart farming and efficient utilization of time and resources whilst reducing crop losses, etc. HCR are heavily involved with Agritech, having helped launch and back in partnership with Agri EPI, the Agritech Zone at the Royal Three Counties show that took place in June this year, and the zone which operated in a dedicated marquee with more than 20 exhibitors and 3 days of presentations, panel discussions and networking, helped to connect farmers and agricultural businesses with the organisations, government bodies, academics who provide the research, funding and development for and manufacturing of cutting-edge technology, machinery and equipment for the farming industry. So Ben, how would you summarise your role at Hartpury in a few sentences?
I might struggle in a few sentences, but I think, so I manage the Agritech Center, which is part of the industry zone, which we've developed as part of our agriculture campus. So it's part of our wider plans are to develop a digital innovation farm, which is effectively evolving our agriculture campus, which is blessed with obviously educational facilities, an on-site commercial farm, but obviously now our industry zone, which is comprised of our Agritech Center and also Tech Box Park program, which I'm sure we'll get into and introduce as well.
Okay, thanks for that. So what is Agritech and why is it important?
I guess, you made some good introductions there to what Agritech actually is. To be honest, we quite like putting it in quite simple terms at Hartpury. I suppose we say it's any technological based solution, whether hardware or software, which can provide a benefit to an agricultural business. So that could be directly with obviously some production technologies. You mentioned obviously an example you mentioned there in the USA, but also you've got others that could maybe benefit the farm business or another agri business, whether through an intermediary. So you mentioned about social media there and the ways in which you gained access to that information. That can benefit an agri-business as well. I think using social media as an example of Agritech, whether benefiting the farm personally or commercially. So I think why it's important is very much we use the buzzwords around productivity, efficiency, don't we? But also putting a measure to sustainability as well, which is really, really important as we go forward, as we maybe aim to reach and set net zero targets, putting a measure to our environmental impact, restoring and improving biodiversity. How we share information to do with that all comes through technology, and efficient ways of doing that is coming through technology, which goes into Agritech as well. So a very, very broad thing, which I'm sure you probably gather through your area of work as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of spin and buzzwords flying around at the moment, aren't there?
Definitely, yeah.
So how can Agritech help farming mitigate the challenges?
I think we're already seeing it. Yeah, I think we're already seeing it. I think our sort of viewpoint at Hartpury is that Agritech, we often see it as the latest stuff. It's a common perception that we always look to maybe robotics or automation or drones and ways in which we can do different things with data now. Whereas we probably need to remember that we're no stranger to change or innovation in agriculture. And we could argue that advanced mechanization back in, let's say, early mid-19th century, to then using more precision farming techniques, GPS, more prudent use of antibiotics, genetic modification. All these things are examples of agri-tech which have helped us become more efficient, that have helped us in the past. Now, I think the reasons why it's coming to the floor a bit more is because we've just seen an accelerated rate in the amount of technologies and solutions that's now coming available to us. So I think in terms of how we mitigate challenges, we talk a lot about measure to manage is quite a common saying we say in sort of farming circles, certainly through the contacts we have through our centre, what we do at Hartpury. Certainly that's aligned to the trend we're now moving to in agri-tech. Often it's a lot around data now, digitally based solutions. And so a lot of technologies are either providing data as a service, which you might experience through apps or software, but also maybe using data and information as part of the function, of which we can bring in things like robotics and automation and creating sort of actionable insights then. I think, okay. We've spoken before, haven't we, Bryn, about sort of the things that I think farming, there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of variables you need to be in control of. I think in terms of mitigating challenges, technology has a really key role to play and is already playing a role in terms of making us aware of things before they become serious issues.
Yeah.
A prime example of this could be sensors or sensor-based technology for monitoring health and welfare of livestock. So it gives us early indication of when to maybe check on animals or maybe further check on animals or administer medication before we see any clinical physical signs, of illness or disease. So I think these are the ways in which it's very much an aid to what we've been doing for years, as well as maybe in some cases improved efficiency of various tasks. So a lot of areas there to how we can be a bit more proactive in creating those insights, I suppose.
Yeah, the developments and the innovation really helped. Anyway, we run a suckle herd up in the Brecon Beacons, and to get that heads up if you've got an issue with regard to a problem calver, it's fantastic from the point of view of animal health and welfare, and the farmer being able to deal with the problem and keep costs down, such as veterinary costs and issues.
This is it. I think I remember when I was on farm, and I still keep my hand in day to day now, but I think it's just all the variables that are outside your control it's just staggering. You often think, how do you keep on top of it? And ultimately it's just trying to see efficient ways of doing that, and technology, even in just apps or simple software, can do that, just bringing things together so that you can make more justifiable decisions. I guess you're doing it based on evidence rather than guesswork. So I think that's very much a key role that agri-tech and technology has to play.
Exactly. So can you tell us a little bit more about, you sort of touched on it initially in terms of what you're doing at the Agritech Center, but can you give us a little bit more detail about what you've got on site and where you're going?
So the centre, in short summary, we officially opened in February 2020. So you could argue we're still quite fresh. Obviously, that was just before the pandemic, of which we moved to virtual ways of doing things, similar to a lot of different institutions or organisations. But in terms of a quick summary about what we do, what we're trying to sort of tackle and challenge is that from a farmer's perspective, let's say, when we look at agri-tech, we often then throw in into the mix and sort of challenges around navigation, fragmentation, demystifying. And that's because although we welcome a lot of different solutions to become available, often then it's quite difficult for a potential commercial user to navigate those things and see what's available for them. So that's the awareness piece. Now, the next pillar of our work is around the access. We want to obviously, from a farmer's perspective, again, they want to hear about the technical aspects to a lot of different solutions, but you want to see things practically being demonstrated as well in the field where appropriate, and see how it works in a commercial setting. And then lastly, you want to support in the training area as well. The nature of business is that they're like sharks. You move forward or, you don't do any, or you're not sustainable at all. And that's the same with tech businesses and their products and services as well. And as there comes through changes, sometimes that creates a requirement for the user to then be updated to ensure that they get the most out of those solutions. So to cover those areas, we want to improve awareness, access and training to the latest available and proven technologies for both current generation of farming businesses, but also the future generations of those coming through as well, which we're quite conveniently placed with our industry work, with being based at the University and College of Hartpury as well. So we obviously link to the academic work for them, which I know we'll go on to a bit later about in terms of maybe how we support students. But our industry work is there to support that. So we're very much that impartial leaning post for a lot of farm businesses and farm staff, agriculturalists, as well as those aspiring to get into the industry, with anything to do with making first investments in technology, all the way to sort of further investments and decisions with it as well. So very much in need. And one thing I will say is that we're completely unique in the industry in this space. So those other organizations, other projects, initiatives, they're quite geared up to supporting new investments coming, what else we could do, innovation, a lot of R&D. I don't discredit that work at all. I think it's fantastic to see where we could be going with farming and food production, but we're very much taking a ground up approach. We're there to support farming businesses with their challenges now, and if that can be supported by various different technologies and new ways of doing things, we're there just to help across those 3 pillars of work.
Yeah, and you're getting a good level of engagement, I'm sure.
Yeah, loads. To be honest, I think associated with our centre, we've got what we call our digital farming network, which is open to anyone to register to, whether you're just a wider stakeholder interested in what goes on in terms of agri-tech and food production. But it's open to farmers, food advisors, researchers, students, etc. So we've got over 800 farming businesses logged on and registered to that since we launched that earlier this year, which is obviously really encouraging. And that's a mixed bunch. You know, we've got farmers on there that aren't using any form of technology, but they want to know how to get started and they want to be supported on their journey with it. But also we've got those that have maybe invested in quite a different amount of solutions, and they want to ensure that how they get the most out of those solutions going forward. So they want to be connected to an impartial hub, of which we provide at Hartpury.
Super, that's great. So why, coming back to the sort of the younger generation, why do you think it's important to support the future generation as well with agri-tech?
I think if you look at the demographic of farming businesses, I guess they often, when we did our sort of research, spoke to as many different farmers as possible before setting up our Agritech Center. The call was that those different stakeholders, those different farm businesses, owners, managers, sometimes they would say, look, we wouldn't be open to it ourselves to adopt these new technologies. However, we'd be really supportive of a future generation to come through with the appropriate skills to put it into motion and put it into plan and effectively implement it, you know, straight away. So in terms of our link to, you know, the college and university students, our centre and our industry zone is based on our campus is access to industry for them. And it's quite nice to see sometimes where we host maybe particular companies or provide sessions ourselves with regards to this sort of support. Often we get a student, lecturer, researcher and a farmer sometimes all in the same room because the need's the same. So it's quite nice for them to have the latest skills to go out with once they graduate. And obviously we work with a lot of your sort of young generation, up and coming generation, which aren't studying with Hartpury as well, but they're looking to make their imprint on the farming business at which they're working on. So I think, yeah, a lot of work, which is encouraging. But I think I want to nick sort of quote from a colleague and say, look, a lot of young generation are often digital natives. So they can pick up and run with these technologies quite quickly. But I think what we want to build and support them with is understanding the function behind a lot of the technologies.
Yeah.
Often we see a lot of the students and young generation, they'll come through and they'll tell me the benefits. However, what we want them to understand is the function behind it all. You know, so I think it's all about making the right considerations. So when you go to agricultural shows and you look at various different products and services, you're asking the right questions. And you're not just looking at what you can see physically, but you're asking about maybe the digital aspects as well, with understanding of how that impacts you and your business. And obviously then making good investments off the back of that. So that's in effect, you know, really what we want to do and support with, you know, sort of the younger generation and why they're quite key to obviously the future of all this as well.
Yeah, the sort of the tech speak, if I could put it that way, can be quite dazzling to the farmer in a way. Sometimes it is to me, but I suppose it's promoting and showing that basic usability functionality, which can have a real impact commercially for a farm, practically speaking.
No, absolutely. We want to improve that insights. It's not necessarily, blurting out all the jargon associated with the technology in the background. It's sieving that. We do that work. We're sieving that jargon into something that's appropriate to understand and relevant, and obviously really important to understand from a user's side. So like I say, it's making sure that we've got people coming along that are making the right considerations and putting a little bit more pressure on that, that technology as it's being developed. So we're seeing the solutions come through that are effectively hitting the nail on the head. So we're not necessarily getting things that might not be of use or not completely of use. We're getting things that are coming through and hitting that challenge directly, obviously, and obviously we're reaping the benefits as a business going forwards.
Okay. And so specifically, we sort of touched on it a bit, but if someone comes to you with a new idea, new business, new startup, what's the sort of first thing that you do with them? How do you support that specifically, initially at least?
So I guess we don't really sort of support the initial idea. However, we support businesses once they have that prototype.
Okay.
So we run what's called our Tech Box Park program, which is our sort of background work and our reaching hand to those initiatives and projects and other areas of work that are supporting through incubation, which you may have heard about, supporting startup businesses with getting their idea off the ground and into a sustainable business model.
Yeah.
We're there to support that through accelerating the product development phase, I suppose. So getting that prototype, whether it is something physical or digital, into something robust enough for the industry. Now, we've found that the needs from businesses that obviously would qualify and can be supported from us in that instance, all the needs are different. Every business is different, isn't it? So I think, but at core, we're there really to support that product development, trial, test, feasibility work. So whether it's connections to Hartpury's farm for practical trials and testing, or our network of farms, whether obviously we can put people in touch with appropriate sites and appropriate farm systems or land, which obviously they can then use. Obviously, that's very difficult to come by. Obviously, Hartpury's a go-to place for that now. But or whether it's wider business support packages as well, whether covering finance, whether it's sustainability, legal, and obviously we want to make sure that people are connected to the right expertise, such as yourselves, I suppose. So making sure that they can accelerate that work. And I mean, how that feeds into our center then is that hopefully we can talk about a lot more solutions going through into the future that have been influenced and supported by industry. So going back to my point earlier, they are hitting that nail on the head. So they're not continually doing market research and product development work once they've commercially launched. We're making sure that we're ticking those boxes at a quicker rate going on in the background. So we also provide sort of physical workspace if they need that as well. So effectively, we're applying and providing that market immersion. If companies, whether in agriculture or outside of agriculture, are developing something new or something already existing, or further developing something already existing, we're there to provide that field station and that agricultural rural hub for them to be immersed in the market, have conversations with a plethora of different personnel who all come from agriculture background, with a wide range of knowledge, to sort of go through agriculture 101 sort of sessions for them to understand it and see how that can obviously then be relevant to them making tweaks to their product or service, and it all ties together then. So very unique again. We want to make sure that we're supporting companies get introduced to agriculture, from outside of different sectors. So we've engaged with companies, whether through manufacturing, telecommunications, for example, who may have not have thought that agriculture could be a market for them. And obviously it's really humbling and really nice to say, look, we are really in need of solutions such as that you're providing. And it's quite nice to think that the technology we might be looking for might already exist, but obviously being operating and being used in another sector. So it's great to be doing that work and improving that outreach for the sector and industry as a whole, I suppose.
Brilliant. So it's a fantastic level of support across the board, really, isn't it? How do you, just moving on, how do you, can Agritech help with food security? How do you see it working there?
I think, going back to the buzzwords, I think to meet food security as part of a sort of growing population, Agritech is there to help support productivity and efficiency and meeting those food demands. But I think increasingly so, and hitting headlines is that wastage as well, the food wastage issues. And I think in terms of improving and supporting that education piece about how food is produced, importance of maybe buying local, understanding food production a bit better. Like I mentioned before, Agritech is not just those things that you see on farm and practically used as part of the food supply chain, but it's also those wider things as well, and making sure that we can support education. So I think there's a lot of different things that obviously can support throughout the supply chain, but ultimately it's engaging those consumers and all different people that can have an influence going backwards as well.
Yeah. In terms of overcoming the challenges of getting farmers to actually use the data available to them and at their fingertips, and there's a massive amount of it. How do we go about that? I mean, I think we touched on it recently, the recent SINAM event in Cheltenham. It was talked about in terms of a data model, all the different stakeholders, etc. But there's a huge amount there, isn't it, at the end of the fingertips of a farmer, be it arable, livestock. How do we approach that? How do we get them to use that properly?
I think it's a two-pronged thing, in that you've got it's a work from the user going back, but also from the developer and the producer, agri-tech vendor as well going forwards. And it's a collective approach. It's the only way it's going to work going forwards if we're going to see better utilization. I suppose firstly from the vendor side, obviously there's lots of work now going into analytics, and lots of words now which I never thought we would say in agricultural context, of a sort of AI and machine learning. This is now being put into practice now. I think simple ways in which we can sieve the data that's now being available to the farmers, or how they can easily interpret it a bit better, a bit more efficiently. There's a key role for analytics to play in that, sieving that information so that you're only seeing things at your fingertips that are appropriate to you and that you're going to use day to day or use most often. So I think there's a key role to play there. So I think it's how we speed up the process, how we can provide more insight relevant to a farm business themselves. It's an old saying that every farm is different, regardless of whether they're just over the hill. And that sort of puts not the pressure, but the sort of challenge to agri-tech vendors to make sure that we've got solutions, whether in terms of how we're using data, are flexible as well, making sure that we can have that more tailored approach. And having this sort of analytics work going on, I know is going on quite heavily, and it's really interesting to see it go forward. And all the work which we're applying data science methods and principles to a lot of different software and apps is now getting really clever. I think we can now get to the stage where we're tailoring things to different farms. From the other side, from the farmer's side, I suppose, they can definitely help in that equation. I think there's a cultural thing, how we run sessions, or we'll be running future sessions as well at Hartpury through our centre, around how you create that innovative culture on a farm, how you instill sort of innovation within your team, and you get people all on board with your vision with regards to adoption and utilization of technology, because it is a collective effort. There's not obviously sometimes you're not only just got one person on a farm, you've got a lot of people involved in that area, and you need all those people sort of buying into where your vision's going. And sometimes that it does involve use of technology to best practice, some best use of data as well, and that's the only way you're going to get full use of it. But I think it's just making sure you're making the right considerations, right decisions as well. So first and foremost, going back to my point, and the sort of the core services of the centre, is that we've got, hopefully, those that are engaging with us and being supported by us, they're going out and they're asking the right questions and considerations. Like I mentioned before, when they see maybe an interesting product or service, they're able to ask the right questions around the data, digital aspects as well. So it's ensuring that they're choosing the things that suit best, whether practically, but also digitally as well. So you're not getting anything going to waste. You're not seeing any data being underutilized or not looked at, or not obviously interpreted. So that's the sort of two-pronged thing, but I'm confident that we're going in the right direction. So there's a lot of different solutions that are now being more targeted, a lot more bespokely made. There's a lot of work going on, obviously, like I mentioned, in analytics, but also the culture, obviously, we're supporting, and it's encouraging to see it amongst the community and contacts that we have. They're really obviously on board with understanding a little bit more about the sort of digital aspects for a lot of different tech that's coming to the floor, and obviously making appropriate decisions relevant for their business. So yeah, really encouraging, but the future is bright, I suppose, Bryn.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's great. And I suppose, yeah, there's a huge amount of raw data there. And it's, as you say, the analytics side is absolutely key to sort of getting a proper focus on it and using it in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think, like I said, the theme is, I mean, what's presented this challenge is that we've seen a lot more technologies come through that are providing another data set, another data set, another data set. Now, I think for us to best utilize all the data that's valuable to us, I think there is challenges. It's not just as simple as maybe applying analytics and, you know, having things sieved down in one particular tool. I know we've picked on before, and it has been picked up on in wider events, of which we want to focus on at Hartpury, is this interoperability issue. You know, we've got no formal data standards for sharing of information between Agritech side, you know, Agritech apps or software, and therefore we've got no connection. So therefore, it almost puts a bit of a halter, a bit, you know, it pulls the reins a bit on, you know, sort of progress and investment in technology then. So we want to see that being progressed with, and we're really encouraged by sort of the connections we've made with the cyber community, obviously in Cheltenham. You mentioned about Cynam there, and obviously building these connections, talking about the challenges we're facing in agriculture, because I'm quite open to see if this is being experienced in other sectors, and if there's transferables to take, then obviously we need to take them. But ultimately, there's lots of things that need to be addressed there. So it's not just a quick fix, but like I said, it is moving forward quite progressively.
Yeah, great. And as a sort of a finish on those Q&As, Ben, in terms of the advantages of Agritech for consumers, I mean, there are a lot, but do you want to pick your top two or three?
I think there's a big thing, you know, there's a big agenda around, you know, education of food production. And I think Agritech not only is adding to sort of productivity, efficiency, making sure we're putting meat on, you know, sort of food on shelves, and meeting those demands of the consumer, but also we're meeting those sort of, you know, sort of the ever curious consumer and their needs and what they want to understand. We're also addressing that education agenda as well, for people to have greater access, more open access to understand how food is produced. We're seeing it a lot. Like I mentioned, you know, Agritech is not just these production on-farm technologies, it's also what we define as supply chain technologies. So which there's a lot of different organizations that are involved in data aggregation. They could be involved in compliance and benchmarking. They could be involved in, like I mentioned, social media, just as a very simple example, you know, providing that platform whereby we can share a bit more detail and information to do with food production, provide more ground truth data and evidence to say this is what's going on. This is, you know, sort of our true environmental impact. This is the methods of production going on in UK agriculture, and to be able to share that efficiently, Agritech is obviously providing, you know, that platform to do so. So I think, yeah, that's probably the biggest one for me, and that's quite nice to say, you know, that obviously Agritech has that role to play and making sure that we can say, look, this is UK farming. If you want to engage with it, if you want to understand with it, and I'm sure it has, as a result, you know, sort of opened quite a number of doors, whether for people, you know, as we've mentioned, you know, engaging with the cyber community, for them to understand a little bit more about agriculture. That's come through the connection and relation they can make with Agritech and technology. You know, I think there's lots of different connections there that can be made, you know, consumers to understand, you know, could I work in agriculture? You know, what actually goes on? You know, all these different businesses. There's a common misperception that agriculture is just a sector. You often directly associate it with farming. However, it's an industry, you know, it's made up of a lot of different sectors, you know, a lot of different businesses then working in support on the periphery. So I think it's for people to have an understanding of the whole industry as well, and how it's not just important for them in terms of food production, but it's all the different things going on, I think is a good thing to share as well.
And in terms of the future, I mean, for me, you know, we seem to be we're in a real sweet spot at the moment in terms of what we're doing, in terms of innovation and investment that's coming in, and you know, what, such as individuals such as yourself, in terms of the involvement. Do you see that, you know, rapidly increasing in the future, or in terms of the learning curve and development, or are we going to plateau out a bit?
No, I think it's rapidly going to increase. The skills needs are going, you know, through the roof now. We're obviously seeing that with, you know, it's obviously supporting with the future generation coming through. yeah, I think it's really key. It's exciting, I suppose, Bryn, to see obviously where it's going into and what things are now coming to the floor. I think we only can just look at, like I said, that's probably why I brought the point up in terms of where we've come from to where we are now and the sort of the rate of change. Like I said, we're no stranger to change, but there's just lots of different things that are now coming through, which can obviously then, you might need some additional skills or knowledge base to accelerate that to go forward. So, but it's exciting though. It's exciting going forward.
Ben, there's some really interesting points and material from you there. So thanks for that. And there's no doubt that, the industry is one of the oldest industries in the world, and arguably we would say one of the most important. We know that a lot of traditional farming methods are not sustainable. As we've said, it's an industry facing, a massive number of challenges: food security, lowering carbon footprint, etc., and maintaining livestock health through preventing disease. Innovation is obviously essential, and as we said, it can be achieved through investing in agri-tech. Ben, thank you for your time, and we hope everyone has found this session helpful and thought-provoking. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thank you.